I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. Why the disaster in the Gulf has some people saying that the real color of religion is green.
Is it a new trend in politics? Pro-life women make their mark.
And we'll show you a side of Rome that you may not know.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Responding to the devastating oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico has become a rallying cry for religious groups. In the words of one leader, this is one of those rare moments when you can really focus people's attention on what's happening to God's creation. This
week, the environmental organization, the Sierra Club, even organized an interfaith prayer service and tour. And among those who took part, Tom Costanza of Catholic Charities in New Orleans, and he joins us now by phone. Welcome, Tom, to Currents. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
One of the main questions that I had for you is, we're talking about the oil spill. The Sierra Club has described this as really an issue of values, and you were at this interfaith prayer service recently. What do you think about the mix of capitalism perhaps conflicting with these moral values that you'll find in religion and faith?
Well, you know, the life and dignity of the human person is so fundamental to us in Catholic social teaching, and that in the family right now. I think these are the things that at the prayer service, which was extremely powerful, that were lifted up and that we hold in common, you know, across all religions, is that sort of inherent dignity of the human person and a family and care for creation, and all these things sort of kind of came together this last couple of days, where we were able to get some first-hand experience of what's happening in the field, but listen to some of the strength that people have relative to their faith and the importance of family and the importance of caring for God's creation. So those are certainly, this particular disaster has put together sort of this sort of integration of the fundamental values that all of our major religions have.
Right. The Associated Press, in an article this week, said that, you know, or sort of alluded to the fact that this sort of disaster might be drawing people back into the church, and that sort of green theology that we're talking about here might be drawing people back into the church because they're seeing something in the headlines that is affecting God's creation, and they're seeing it every day. Do we see that happening? Do we see more people coming back into the church because of a disaster like this?
Well, you know, certainly we've been having in our diocese what we call spirituality and stress sessions, where Archbishop Eamon asked us to put together sort of an integration of spirituality and the strength of the prayer, and we read from the Pope's encyclical on Christian hope, and then we bring in some professional mental health psychiatrists and clinical social workers. And that has been extremely well attended in the parishes. We've had one in each deanery, and people are flocking to that. And I think it's meeting a need for them to see the integration of spirituality and then the different the value that the mental health professions bring to a very stressful situation. Because not only do we have the oil spoil, I hate to call it spill, but we have the oil moratorium right now. We're looking at losing, I was just at a meeting, we could lose 8,000 jobs in one county, per se. We call them parishes, and right in the middle of our Catholic population. So this is going to be continuing to add stress, but what we found, that the families and the fishermen are extremely spiritual and extremely rely and dependent on God, and they draw on that, and they just look at that as just one more obstacle to overcome. They just overcame Katrina, and they made it through, and they look at this as in another way, just another obstacle to overcome, but with their faith.
Very resilient, Tom, and obviously very involved in practicing their faith. One of the stories that we did previously was about a pastor from somewhere else in the U.S. that had gone down to the Gulf Coast region and sort of walked across the beaches and sort of saying prayers with people, and another with people, singing groups that were praying in their faith groups from perhaps Oklahoma, other parts again of the country to come down. And while that is of major value, there's also now an activism component, it seems, that's coming along with the faith indeed, as well. So can you tell me a little bit more about that part of it, how people are becoming more activist in terms of really, in some ways, becoming more political and using their faith as really their inner value launching pad for that activism?
Well, that's a great question. From our perspective here, we're through the Catholic Campaign of Human Development, are funding the fishermen to organize themselves. They know how to change the BP plan. Their voices have to be heard. So they're excited about the ability to add a little more capacity to their associations of shrimpers and oystermen and crabbers. And they have already made impact with Mr. Feinberg on the way he is designing the claims process. So I think from our perspective, we certainly like to advocate, but we want to build that from a grassroots level. We want to build that from a community level. We want to build that activism and that faith organizing from the people most affected, and that is the fishermen, the deckhands, and that has been our initial strategy. Now, we have many things to do on an advocacy level relative to changing the way this thing is designed. This recovery is designed through the All Spill Act. It's not a Stafford Act. And so there's no disaster case. There's no disaster food stamps. There's no disaster unemployment. It's not a fair disaster. The responsible party is BP. So you don't have the massive infrastructure of FEMA or support system in place right now because it's not a naturally caused disaster.
Right. That's a private company.
Yeah. That's a. But the activism, we want that at least initially to be from the fishermen and their families, and to empower them, to assist them to have their voice, to be heard. And certainly that's in keeping with our fundamentals of Catholic social teaching.
All right. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us here on Currents. We appreciate your time, sir. All the best. Our prayers go with you as the area continues to try and recover from what has just been a major disaster there along the Gulf Coast. Sir, thanks again.
Thanks again. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Well, stay tuned, everyone. We'll have more Currents coming up straight ahead. When we return, we'll have the day's headlines, including freedom for Cuban dissidents, thanks in part to a Catholic cardinal. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up later, no one knows their names, but the church certainly remembers their sacrifice. We'll have their story. But first, let's check today's headlines. Well, Catholic leaders in Cuba say dozens of political prisoners there will be set free. The announcement comes after a meeting between the country's Catholic cardinal and government leaders. CNN's David Ariosto reports now it would be the largest prisoner release in Cuba since Raul Castro took control of the country in 2008.
In a move that seems to have many people on this island nation talking, 52 political prisoners are set to be released and will be allowed to leave the country. Now, that's according to a statement by Cuba's Roman Catholic Church that has been instrumental in the release of political prisoners in the past. Now, this group is representative of 75 dissidents arrested in 2003 during a government crackdown on political opposition. Now, in terms of this recent release, 5 are expected to be released immediately. Another 6 are expected to be transferred to prisons closer to their homes, and the remaining 47 prisoners will be freed and released over the course of the next 3 to 4 months. The move coincides with a visit by Spanish Foreign Minister Miguel Ángel Moratinos. Moratinos and his Cuban counterpart Bruno Rodriguez sat down with Cuban President Raul Castro earlier Wednesday in a meeting that also included the island's Roman Catholic Cardinal Jaime Ortega. Ortega met with President Castro earlier in May, describing it as a, quote, magnificent start to talks surrounding the potential release of some of the island's jailed dissidents. Now, earlier, Cuba released jailed dissident Darcy Ferrer and ailing prisoner Ariel Sigler. The announcement raises questions about whether Cuban dissident Guillermo Fariñas will end his months-long hunger strike in protest of Cuba's imprisonment of political activists. It also raises questions about whether this move signals a policy shift about the way Cuba treats its political prisoners.
That's CNN's David Ariosto in Havana. Well, police in China are searching for suspects in the death of a priest and nun found dead in a hospice where they worked. The two were members of an underground church that's not recognized by the Chinese government. They were found stabbed to death on Tuesday. Meantime, a bishop from another underground church in China was released from jail today. Reports say Bishop Jia Shiguo is faithful to the Holy See. He's been arrested 13 times since 2004. More details have emerged about how new rules might change the way the Catholic Church handles sex abuse cases. The Associated Press reports the Vatican will crack down on priests who sexually abuse mentally impaired adults. Citing an anonymous Vatican source, the AP says a soon-to-be-released document on the handling of child sex abuse cases will also deal with abuse victims over the age of 18 who have a, quote, imperfect use of reason. The report says they will have their own cases handled by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith directly.
Pope Benedict began his summer vacation yesterday. Following his weekly audience in Rome, the pontiff boarded a helicopter bound for his summer residence at Castel Gandolfo, 25 miles away from the Vatican. Benedict will remain there until September. The Vatican says he will take a break from his weekly audiences for the remainder of July. And the Pope will spend his time resting, reading, and writing, and then resume his weekly audiences in August. And Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal signed a law this week allowing people to bring more than just their Bibles to church on Sunday. As Luke Margolis reports, pastors and parishioners may soon be packing heat in some congregations.
If you're attending services at First United Methodist Church in Baton Rouge, Reverend Chris Andrews is pretty clear on what he thinks you should bring with you.
I want people to bring their Bibles. I want them to bring their children. I want them to bring their friends. I'd love for them to bring their casseroles to church, but leave the weapons of destruction someplace else.
He's referring to the new law allowing owners of concealed carry permits to bring their weapons into houses of worship. The bill's author says the bill was written with recent history in mind.
Every key point that I moved the legislation to the legislature, somewhere in Louisiana or the Arklatex area, there was a gun-related incident the day before I went before. Now, I never brought that up, but it just reiterated to me that we do live in different times.
He says the law allows pastors to have specially trained members of their congregation act as a de facto church security force.
I can see what the representative is trying to accomplish. I simply think that his whole strategy is misinformed and wrong.
As for those already sworn to protect and serve, the potential additional guns won't cause a problem.
You don't ever assume that any situation is a safe situation, and so our deputies are always trained and prepared to respond to high-risk situations and always looking out for someone with a weapon. And so either way, our deputies are going to be prepared to respond.
That is Luke Margolis reporting. And finally tonight, the Catholic League says Jay Leno is a bigot for comments that he made last night on The Tonight Show. In his opening monologue, Leno talked about the Catholic priest in Connecticut indicted for allegedly spending $1.3 million of parish money, some of it on male escorts. Leno said priests were asking why buy the escort when the altar boys are free. The Catholic League called those comments vicious and is encouraging people to contact The Tonight Show's executive producer.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up. Just ahead, is this the year of the pro-life woman? We'll find out. Welcome back. Coming up in a bit, if you think this July is hot, just be thankful you were not in Rome 1,946 years ago. We'll explain. But first, another hot topic, politics.
Indeed. In primaries held last month, some of the most significant victories were by women. In the Senate, Carly Fiorina is challenging Barbara Boxer for her seat in California, and Sharon Angle is going up against Harry Reid in Nevada. Both these women are significantly pro-life. So does this signal a shift, perhaps? At least one writer thinks so. Recently, I spoke with Joan Frawley Desmond of the National Catholic Register, who says 2010 could well be the year of the pro-life woman. Joan, thank you so much for joining us here on Currents today.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Well, you obviously write for the National Catholic Register and have written a little about these issues. What is the trend that we're seeing in this year's primaries when it comes to women who are pro-life running for office?
Well, basically, we have a couple of very promising races. We have Carly Fiorina, Senate race in California. That's perhaps the most important one because the GOP there actually has been very divided on life issues. We also have Jane Norton. We're still going to have to see what happens with her primary. That's in Colorado. But Jane Norton has made defunding Planned Parenthood one of her platforms in the primary campaign. We also have another Senate race in Nevada. In that case, Sharon Angle, who's kind of a Tea Party person and a former homeschooling mom, has won the primary. She's also a pro-life candidate, and she's hoping to unseat Harry Reid, who now leads the party in the Senate. And so that would be a huge race to follow. And at the moment, Angle is neck and neck with Reid.
Well, Joan, what do you think this may say, or is this saying, about the country as a whole now, and why might it be happening now? Why are these pro-life women coming out now and running for office?
Carly Fiorina told me that she thinks what's happening is that more and more young people, the culture overall is becoming more pro-life, and then that's going to be reflected in the political choices that people have. So that's the number one issue, is the culture is becoming more pro-life. Women as a whole have been often represented as pro-abortion, but a recent Gallup poll once again confirmed that it's almost 50-50, well, more like 48-45, pro-life, pro-choice for American women. So it's not actually true that American women are more likely to vote for abortion rights, though they're often depicted that way by abortion rights supporters in the media.
I see. Do you think that this then says something about the country as a whole in general?
Well, only that the country seems to be more sensitized to life issues. The other issue, which may be playing a role that Fiorina also suggested, was that science, embryology, is starting to show people that life begins at conception, and that was something that was not available to science before. So even though some people would argue that a pro-science position would be pro-choice or pro-embryonic stem cell research, actually Fiorina argues, and others have argued, that science, even something as simple as a sonogram, is showing people that life begins at conception. Many people seem to argue that in the wake of Roe v. Wade, that we now have several generations of so-called Roe survivors who may feel like their lives could have been at risk if their mother had supported abortion rights, and as a result, they may take a different view of abortion rights than was taken at the time that Roe v. Wade passed in 1973.
Interesting. So not exactly an exit or a Gallup poll here, but what do you think their chances are of winning?
Well, Fiorina is running neck and neck at the moment in California, and of course she is hoping to unseat Barbara Boxer, who's a major abortion rights supporter, has a 100% NARAL Pro-Choice America voting record. Now, Fiorina is somebody new to the whole pro-life movement. She has been the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. So some pro-lifers were a little concerned about where she was going, but she has received the endorsement of the Susan B. Anthony list, the National Right to Life Committee. So people are feeling pretty confident about her pro-life credentials. Then we also have Sharon Angler, who is at the moment, as I mentioned, neck and neck right now with Harry Reid, and that would be a major defeat. People think Angler has a very good chance. She's actually now ahead of Reid in the most recent poll, 11 points ahead. I'm sure a lot can happen between now and the election.
Great. Well, Joan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Joan Frawley Desmond, contributor to the National Catholic Register.
Thanks. I'm happy to be there. Bye-bye.
One of the most interesting things that I think she noted is that there are perhaps several generations of what she called Roe v. Wade survivors now who may actually then vote for these women in office, meaning women now who might have been aborted that are living, that now may be so grateful for the lives that they're living that they would then vote for a woman who is now pro-life.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, you have to look at this too as this an overall political movement. I mean, the Tea Party has been something that's been this election cycle in particular very, very, you know, strong and powerful political movement. And also you look at, historically we see that whatever party wins the presidency in the midterm elections 2 years later, the other party generally picks up seats in the Congress. And so that might be historical trends. People like having a more balanced government, one party in the White House, another party controlling Congress. So those are also things that might be playing into it as well. So you have to kind of take it all into consideration too.
All factors.
Well, let's stay with us. We'll have much more currents coming up. From colosseums to cathedrals, the fall of Rome and the rise of the church. Well, if you think this July has been a scorcher, well, it has. But imagine being in Rome in July of the year 64. That was when a legendary fire swept through the ancient capital, destroying one neighborhood as part of the first persecution of early Christians.
That persecution changed the city and the church forever. This event is commemorated every year at the end of June on the feast of the first martyrs of Rome. And many don't know the story behind it, but we get details tonight from Rome Reports.
The Vatican is built upon the ancient hippodrome of the emperors Caligula and Nero. There, thousands of Christians were brutally killed. St. Peter was among them. Each year on the last day of June, the Catholic Church remembers these proto-martyrs of the Roman Church with the Feast of the First Martyrs of Rome. The Pontifical Academy Martyrdom Cultorum celebrates this day with a Mass and a procession through the Vatican streets where members of the Order of Malta and Knights of the Holy Sepulchre participate. Proto-martyr is the name given to the first martyrs of the Church in Rome. It is unknown how many died and what their names are.
Tacitus and other historians talk about thousands of victims. It is impossible to count them. But we know that at one time among the victims, there were not only adults, but also elderly, women, and children.
At the time, Emperor Nero blamed Christians for the fire that destroyed part of the Roman city in July of the year 64. But according to historian Tacitus, in reality it was Nero himself who ordered the fire to destroy a popular neighborhood in which he built his new palace, the Domus Aurea. After that first persecution, more followed, sometimes locally, sometimes in all of the empire.
They were
massacred. Some were dressed with animal fur, and others burned with torches to light up the night. They suffered indescribable torture.
Among these martyrs are St. Peter. His tomb, on which they built St. Peter's Basilica, is in the cemetery of the Vatican Hill, which you can still visit under the grottos of the Basilica. Centuries later, these martyrs continue being an example for all Christians.
Actually, there doesn't exist a good or bad feeling. We don't have them. We have become gray. We have turned into stones. We have become cold. Martyrs are here to remind us that this is one of the major sicknesses of the spirit.
One day to remember all of these people who, for a long period of history, were persecuted and tortured simply for being Christians, and to remember those who are persecuted today just because they believe in God.
Very interesting. And, you know, I mean, as we said earlier, the heat that we're experiencing, nothing compared to what they experienced there. And, you know, I mean, it's very interesting, too, that it's brought up about, you know, being stone-like almost in our faith. And really, you know, I mean, there's a scripture that says, you know, you should either be hot or cold, but not lukewarm. And so I think that's something to remember as well, especially in this context, because you think about it, those people were definitely something, you know, they did something and they sacrificed so much because of their faith.
Right, and we see that even still today, people willing to put their lives on on the line for their faith. And martyrdom is something that when we think about it today, I don't know that we make the general sacrifices on a regular daily basis that perhaps we could for our faith. Forget about sacrificing your entire life for it. So I think for me, for example, it brings you to be not so cold and a little bit warmer by just perhaps doing something small and manageable.
The little things on a daily basis, absolutely.
Precisely. Well, that is it for tonight. Coming up tomorrow, we head into the deep with Bishop DiMarzio to talk about a popular subject this time of year, weddings.
All right. In the meantime, remember, though, you can always catch us online. We're over at currentsny.net. Check us out on Facebook as well. And if you have an idea for a story, maybe just want to get in touch with us, either you can drop us a line, currentsny.net. That's drop us a line at currentsny.net. It's our email address. Until next time, I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.